Amazing. Thank you guys. Thank you guys so much for having us. We're super excited to be here. Like we just said, Pat is remiss that he couldn't be here today. He was super excited to be up here with us, but we're here representing Barstool Sports. I'm here specifically representing the Pat Bev pod with Ferrone, with me. And it's been an incredible journey. I think working with an NBA player, I think is indicative of where the space is going to go. I'm a normal guy. A little bit about my background. I was at Penn State I was a journalism major, just trying to be a newspaper writer or be on the local sports radio show or something like that. And I wound up becoming a professional battle rapper. I was one of the best professional battle rappers in the world, traveled around the world for years doing battle rap. Australia, Sweden. I became a 2-time world battle rap champion, and it kind of got in the way of my dreams to become a sports media member. But that was still a dream in the back of my head. And this entire time, I wanted to work at Barstool Sports because, to me, Barstool is a place where people are talking about sports the way that I talk about sports with my friends when I'm sitting on the couch, when I'm at the bar, when I'm just hanging out. And to me, that's how I wanted to talk about sports. That was the discourse that I was interested in. And so after several battle rap world champions, I was pretty excited about that and was able to make my way into Barstool Sports. And then this past year, after about 7 years at Barstool, I was finally paired up with Pat Bev. And Pat Bev is now on my home team, the Sixers. And we've created one of the coolest podcasts to me in all of sports, where somebody who's a fan of a team has a podcast with someone who is on the team, and we're talking about everything that happens in the NBA. I think it's indicative of where sports media is going. And Erika, as the CEO, if you're cool with it, I'd like to riddle you with a couple questions about where you think all of this is going.
That's great. And then if people have questions, just yell. We're not particularly formal.
Yeah, obviously.
Before you get going, I got to hear this. Roast
Soshnick wants me to rap cleverly, but I can't do that without Pat Beverly. And that's what it comes down to. So he's locked in. So I'm curious, as someone who is acquiring talent in this world, what are you looking for as far as talent that Barstool is going to acquire? Obviously, you've gotten talent from all over the world. Guys like Spittin' Chicklets are hockey players. Guys like Pat McAfee, who's turned into one of the biggest moguls in all of media. What is it about the people that you hire, that you saw, that differentiated them and made it seem like these are people that belong with Barstool Sports?
Yeah, that's a great question. So I think, thank you for having us, and obviously pop in questions from anyone. I think when I think about influence, we live in a world now, and this has changed dramatically since I joined Barstool in 2016, where opinion equals influence. Like, that's really the equation. I think there are a lot of athletes who aspire to be celebrities, but there's very few athletes who I think can truly command influence, because being influential means, at least on the internet right now, having a very distinct opinion and not being afraid to broadcast it. Like, the reason we liked Pat Bev was he's just mouthy. Like, he's just extremely mouthy. The guy runs his mouth all the time. Same for Pat McAfee. Same for Deion Sanders. And I think what we like are people who have a point of view. They're prolific in wanting to express it. They're creative and weird in terms of how that manifests. You know, if you look at McAfee, for example, like, McAfee's a brilliant marketer. The tank top is just synonymous now. Like, he's thought about it physically, he's thought about it attitudinally, he's thought about it in terms of how he carries himself across WWE or on game day or in his own show. And we look for people like that. We look for people who want to create, who are obsessed with connecting with an audience, who have something to say to them and aren't afraid of the heat when people disagree or agree or want to challenge it. And then we like people like Rone, who, you know, when Rone came to Barstool, he was a battle rapper. We kind of thought of you as like a Philly guy. Then you became this comedy genius, and you've meandered through the hallways on so many different shows and so many different formats, and you're always creating. I think influence now, because everything is short form, everything is video, and everything is competing for space on a TikTok feed, having high frequency and creativity and the meandering nature of popping up in this show or being in that show or talking about the 76ers and then talking about Rough and Rowdy is what keeps people interesting.
And so I'm going to ask you kind of the same question, but in the negative. What types of personalities wind up not working out? What types of characteristics are the ones that don't lead to a fruitful career in media?
Yeah, I think ex-traditional media people don't typically work very well. Like I remember Dave and I interviewing a guy who, very, very established with ESPN. And what we were talking about is, he covered college football. And we were saying, hey, when the game ends, and even if the game ends late because it's on the West Coast, you got to be on the internet with your take. Like, what's your take from the game? What'd you take away from it? What'd you like? What'd you hate? Who pissed you off? Whatever that may be. And the guy said, my producer would have to tell me what to say. Like, my producer would have to structure that for me. And I think we live in an era where media has changed so much because there was so much production. And by production, I mean you were told where to sit, you were told what to wear, you were told what to say, you were told when to say it. The camera would then move to something else, or the story ends. And I think people who are not successful need that type of rigor and that type of format, and celebrities and personalities who need that infrastructure will not work on the internet.
I totally agree. I think that we've kind of moved from a discourse where somebody is saying, like, the rushing attack had 15.4 yards in the first quarter or something, where it's more a guy who's like filming himself on the phone being like, the Eagles fucking suck right now. I think that that's more of a dialogue or discourse that's going to resonate with people, as opposed to somebody being fed a talking point. And I think the people who are most successful are going to be the ones who can speak off the cuff about a ton of different things, who are curious about a ton of different things, who are opinionated about a ton of different things. But I think that in a lot of ways, the media landscape is changing, and I think that Barstool is changing in a lot of ways. We've seen when you started at Barstool, it was almost like we were in this time of lean growth. You kind of got into Barstool, and there was 15 guys in an office, and the ceiling's falling down, and you're trying to create something completely new. Then you build this company into this megalith, this massive company. There's tons of money that's involved with it. Penn is involved with it. And now we're in a period where Dave Portnoy has bought back Barstool for a single dollar. Pretty good business deal on his part. What do you think how would you characterize this current era of Barstool, and what does it mean for everybody at Barstool?
Yeah, I mean, Barstool is, for anybody who follows Barstool or loves Barstool or hates Barstool, it's a wild ride. Like, you can't argue this company that came out of nowhere, a brand that's 20 years old, and it's a 20-year reality show, really, for lack of a better word. When I got to Barstool, there were 15 guys who worked there. We weren't really sure who worked there because Dave only texted them on the holidays to let them know like what their bonuses would be, and everyone just basically knew to blog every 30 minutes and you'd stay out of trouble. And there were a lot of people, I remember joining Barstool, and there was a lot of people on social with Barstool in their handles, and like Barstool JJ. And I was like, does Barstool JJ work here? Like, do we pay this guy? Do we not pay this guy? But we didn't have any money, long story short. We didn't have any money, and I had $1 million in the bank, and I had to make payroll. And that was, to me, I really cared about two things. I'd already committed career suicide by joining Barstool because everyone's like, what have you done? So I cared about keeping the dream alive and keeping the brand strong, and then I cared about making payroll. And so as a result, what it forced us to do is to build content very cheaply. So when Twitter bought Periscope and Facebook was launching Facebook Live, what I really felt was that we had this awesome opportunity to take a bunch of bloggers and to put them on video all day. And I also felt like keeping them busy kept everyone out of trouble, so it just made my life easier. So I just made them work longer. And we were successful at it, and it worked. And then the advertisers came along, and we built a commerce business, and then we built a pay-per-view platform, and then we built a subscription, and then we started to make our own products. And really incredible things happened because we always followed really one thing, which was the brand and the audience. Got big with Penn, went through, being part of a publicly traded company, a highly regulated company. That was kind of a disaster. And so we exited the company twice in 8 years, which is fairly crazy, I think, from a business story perspective. But I would say we're kind of back to that beginning, which is what we do has to be right for the brand. It has to be right for our audience. We have to do it profitably. Every dollar counts. Everyone treats their money like, in this case now it's Dave's money, as their own. And I think that discipline is good because it breeds a lot of creativity.
I totally agree. I think that a couple years ago, you looked not only at Barstool, but across the entire sports landscape, sports media landscape. It was almost like record contracts in the mid 90s, where it's like, you get $1 million deal, you get $1 million deal. Everybody got like these massive deals. But I think not only at Barstool, across the entire media landscape, we're kind of seeing a difference in the ways that deals are structured and the ways that people can create upside. And I think for people who want to have high output, I think that that's a really good thing. And for people who want to coast and just get a fat deal and kind of kick their feet back, it's probably harder times.
Totally, yeah. Like if you look, Spotify yesterday, I think laid off 17% of it. That's a staggering number. But if you look back, like Spotify was doing, they paid Alex Cooper, who came out of our walls, $80 million. They were paying the Obamas. They paid Springsteen. They did Meghan Markle and Harry. The media industry has always gone through that. YouTube did the same thing. Maker Studio did the same thing. Spotify did the same thing. Facebook did the same thing. And now we're in a much more sober era, I would say. One, because you don't need celebrity and influence aren't exactly the same thing, and paying for a big name, it's not a guarantee of getting what you need from a business perspective. I think that's the biggest thing. It's been a very expensive lesson, but I think a lot of companies have learned that. We fortunately didn't have as much money compared to Facebook or Spotify or YouTube, but Deion Sanders was a good bet for us. One, he was famous. He was, a legendary football player, but he also was a really electric, curious personality. And the yardstick for celebrity talent or athlete talent for us became people like Rone. Like, if you can hang with Rone, if you can be as prolific as Rone, if you can be as funny as Rone and beloved and hated as Rone, you'll be great. But the world has changed. It's kind of funny when, 2016, 2017, we built, probably 50 podcasts. We built a lot of podcasts. And everyone at Barstool wanted a podcast. Everybody wanted a podcast. I just want my own podcast. I want my own podcast. And the problem is with a podcast is getting a podcast. Because once you get a podcast, you got to maintain it and do it every day. You got to work on it. You got to nurture it. You got to grow it. And that's the world that we live in. If you want to be a TikTok star, you've got to be prolific and hardworking on TikTok. And I think it's not a lazy man's game anymore. You can't just coast on your sports record or your...
People recognize your face.
Yeah.
And I think it's not only the prolificness and the determination to make it work, but I think there's also an understanding of how some of these platforms work, like TikTok, like YouTube, and a desire to learn how some of these platforms
Totally.
work. And I think that's something that I wish Pat Bev was here to talk about this, but I think it's something that he really understands and he really is curious about. And I was asking him last night when we were recording our show, do you think you can manufacture a viral clip? And he was like, I don't think that that's even what it's about. I think that it's about me talking about things in a way that I want things talked about. It's me controlling the narrative because if I'm the consumer, I want to be consuming something like what I'm creating. And I think it's an understanding of that, and I think it's a desire to create that for everybody. But at the same time, when you have guys who are in the NBA, guys who are the coach of Colorado, you're going to run into some big personalities and, dare I say, even some egos at some times. Mm-hmm. So how do you think you manage dealing with somebody's ego as a creator and also wanting to be the best boss and nurture their creativity at the same time?
Yeah, I think it's funny. Ron's exactly right. Like it's funny, like giving the example of like the Eagles fan who's like, the Eagles suck, blah blah blah. Like we had a guy who, remember, it was a double doink. Was it last season? The Bears have sucked for so long, but it was a double doink year, and we had a guy in the stands who left the stadium and then went live and was just screaming about the kicker, just screaming. And he got kicked off of whatever platform it was for bullying, which was a little bit laughable inside of Barstool. But the thing about it is, like, it's the authenticity, it's the rawness, it's the reaction, and then you have to be willing to mess up all the time. You have to be willing to be like, oop, we can't do that here, we got to go do that over here. I think for us, for our creative people and for our talent, we're a very talent-centric company. The vast majority of our payroll goes to talent. The vast majority of our resources center around talent. For me and for Dave, I would really say it was always about two things, which is people should have the total freedom to create whatever they want, complete freedom. Not a lot of oversight, not a lot of management, not a lot of red tape. And then we have people's back. So when people mess up, if you look at Dion or Pat or Roan, really anyone, we would have their back in that when they screwed up, and we knew that at some point someone would get in hot water about something, that we would support them through that. And the great thing about the internet is people are screwing up all the time, so it would blow over and something new would happen. So, I think for us, it's like giving people the confidence to create and then giving them the support to do that and the feeling of control, and then also the safety that if they screw up, that we'll be there.
I think that you not only give people that confidence that you have their back, but I think you also industrialize the talent to be able to become the type of creator that they want to be. And this is what I mean by that. You let me get in front of our entire ad team and say, here's why I think that you should be selling the shit out of our show. This is why I think that I believe in our show. These are the things that we do well. These are the things that are extraordinary about this show. And then after that meeting, I came into your office. I was like, how do you think I did? And you're like, oh, you did great, Ron. I was like, what did I do wrong? You're like, no, nothing. You did great. And I was like, that can't be true. There has to have been something that I could have done better. And so you're like, okay, after a second you thought about it and you said, I think we need to stop just leaning on telling people how much we care. Because I was in the meeting saying, oh, Pat Bev's bought into the show. I'm bought into the show. We really care. Like he's an NBA player, but he cares about the show. And what we really should be considering and talking about is the fact that Drake is reposting the show. Meek Mill is reposting the show. LeBron listens to the show. Kevin Durant is asking to be on the show. It's these other metrics that really will hold weight not only with advertisers, but are signifiers of how big a show can be or how big something can be at Barstool. So can you tell me a little bit more about why just caring isn't enough?
I think caring is really important. Like, if you don't care, you're kind of fucked. So, like, let's start there, that you have to care. But I think what's funny about influence and about talent is it's hard for talent sometimes to see beyond themselves because, one, it's very hard to be that prolific and put yourself out there on the internet. Like, I really encourage anyone to try it. The amount of hate you get, the amount of reaction you get, the amount of it's a volatile, nasty, nasty place. And so talent really, I think, has to insulate and bubble themselves to go out in the wilderness every day and do that. I always say at Barstool, the hardest thing about being a talent or a personality, and I love talent, like I love people like Ron, is that every day is a blank page. So it's like you don't start with something. Like every day you got to find something to talk about. You got to find a reason to be funny. You've got to find a hook that you can rely on. But as a result, when you're trying to connect talent and brands, in a weird way, brands take that for granted. Like, of course you care. Like, if Pat Bev didn't care, why do you two have a podcast? Like, that would be stupid to have a podcast if nobody cares. And I think one of the challenges right now in the space that we're in is that you have to find a reason to translate what you're doing every day to, why does Colgate toothpaste care? Why does an alcohol brand care? Why does a CPG brand care? Why does a retailer care? And I think that's the piece that we've done a good job of. We can always be better at it, but really making content translate into a vehicle for somebody else's story or somebody else's brand, I think is really important.
I'm going to hit you with one more before we open it up to other people's questions. So I was listening to some discourse about the golf media landscape recently, and someone suggested that within a couple years, golf influencers will be making more than the actual golfers who are on the PGA Tour. Do you think that that's something that we could see across all of sports? And why do you think that is? Why are things trending more in that direction? And how can we or other brands take advantage of that?
That's a good question. There's the business of sports and the business of media, right? The better your team is, the better your players are, the better your athletes are, the more viewership, the more fans you'll have, the more viewership you'll get.
Yeah, I tell Pat that all the time. It's like, make sure the Sixers keep on winning
100%.
or no one's going to care about this
100%.
podcast.
Yeah, Dave jokes about this all the time, but Barstool, a large part of Barstool's success was the success of the Patriots, because the Patriots were having so much success as Barstool was starting to have success, and the two fed each other. Like every year on the Super Bowl, like we lived or died by how many Patriots t-shirts we sold at the Super Bowl, or Eagles t-shirts, or whatever that may be. So I don't know if a golf commentator will make more than a golfer. I think golf is a funny sport, kind of like tennis, where you have a few stars and then you have a lot of nobodies. And personalities and commenters or personalities really will fill that void. I think that was probably true for all media. If you look at McAfee or, yes, there are football players who make an extraordinary amount of money, and then there's a lot of football players that probably make $500,000 a year. Maybe they make $1 million a year. Like McAfee's definitely doing way better than that. So I do think we're in an era where the more fans you have, and personalities can have fans the same way a sports team has fans. There are fans of Roan who root for Roan and root against Roan and want to critique what he's doing every day. That's success. And I think that's, what's interesting about the internet is kind of like live sports where you never know what's going to happen. That was a big part of Barstool's formula, which is like you never know what's going to happen here. And those eyeballs equate to money.
Totally. If anyone in here has any questions, we're super, super happy to answer.
Can I ask a selfish question?
Get after it.
Because, Eben and I have a podcast, we put ourselves out there and, we were called idiots or, it was funny, but we find the success is that it's what we've been doing sitting next to each other for 20 years. So it really is authentic. Mm-hmm. I'm curious how, from both of your perspectives, how would you deliver sports business to your audience? It's considered somewhat highfalutin. Do they care about stadium finance? They care that the money trickles down to they buy the players so their team is good. I think more and more fans are getting into the business of sports. How would you guys deliver it so that it would be consumed by your audience?
You want to go first?
I think that there's two things that I would be considering. I think the first thing that I'd be considering is how much do I care about this as the person who's delivering this message? Because the more I care about it, the more they're going to care about it. But that ties into the second thing. It's considering why this means something to your audience. So it's like, okay, is this affecting my ticket price to the game? Is this affecting how we're going to be able to spend in free agency? Is this affecting how the reporters are going to be having a discourse with the players on the team? Like, what are the ways that it makes sense to the person who's driving in their car or who's riding the subway listening to this podcast? What's really going to resonate with them about that? But I think that it's talking about it exactly like you're saying, in a real way, in a way that is going to be the dialogue that you're just having while you're chatting with your friends, because I think a lot of podcast listeners just want to be the third person in that conversation and just want to have a seat at that table and feel like they're right there with you.
I would do it on TikTok. I would green screen it. Like does anyone here follow Jack Mack from Barstool? Jack Mack was like a social guy who we buried in the basement. And he TikTok came out with green screen, which is basically you can talk behind some image or a piece of content. And he's the fastest growing Barstool personality on TikTok. He's a juggernaut. Really, because he just talks about the news with a background image of whatever the news is. And he talks about sports, and he talks about media, and he talks about celebrity, and he talks about, controversy, he talks about women's soccer. So I think, the way I look at it is we were very lucky in that we were very early at podcasting. I think podcasting is kind of dead. And now it's all about the podcast is the carcass on which the social eats. And that's how I would think about it.
I'm changing my answer. I actually want to use your answer instead. Because you're exactly right. I think that a lot of people who see the Pat Bev pod with Roan, they're seeing the clips of it on TikTok, and they're seeing that's where it lives. That's where it can hit this elevator of virality, and that's where it's getting out to all these people. It's our main marketing tool. It's our main way of growing. It's the way that we can show people that we're funny, the way we can show people we're engaging. So just consider her answer also my answer. What did I say?
Discourse. Any other questions for us?
Hi, thanks for the great conversation today. My question is, you mentioned that this moment for Barstool is sort of a return to the original ethos of the company. So looking ahead to the next sort of 5 years, what do you think is the greatest opportunity for Barstool? And what do you predict may be, a challenge that, you may encounter to accomplishing that goal?
I think the next 10 years for Barstool, I think it's hard to predict. I think what we always cared about, we hit 20 years this year. Barstool's been around 20 years. And it's hard to keep a brand hot for 20 years. And not only to keep it hot, but to grow it so exponentially. If you look on TikTok now, Barstool is the 6th biggest brand in the world on TikTok, period. So, which is crazy, you know what I mean? I still am shocked when people recognize us in California. I was trying so hard to get us to California, that it's amazing that it's gotten so much bigger. So I think the biggest challenge, I think we learned a lot in the Penn acquisition. We had to really change our stripes. We had to add a lot of compliance. We had to add a lot of practices and protocol and SOX, and a lot of it actually was good for us and will carry with us for the future. But I think it will now be just about what resonates. How are we resonating with fans? How is the brand growing? How does the brand mean something? Do we have the right roster of people to mix things up and to be funny that people want to turn to? What we always cared about was when something happens with the 76ers or in battle rap or, you name it, that you're looking to Roan. And Roan is there for you, the fan, with his take or his perspective. And I think it's making sure that we keep doing that. If you look at the challenges, we're dealing with this right now. We have a reality show called Surviving Barstool playing. We had it on YouTube. Kirk Minahan, who's one of the Barstool personalities, told another guy that he'd burn down his house and murder his family, so we get kicked off of YouTube. Given the choice of you either will have your account shut down or take it off of YouTube. We then built a pay-per-view. Now we're trying to figure out the business model of how do we get this great show out to people? That's going to be the challenge, is how are we navigating a very nuanced set of rules, a very diverse set of platforms, and an ever-changing landscape, an ever-changing competitive landscape, and how do we keep giving people what they want where they want it without controlling any of those environments? I think that's going to be everyone's challenge, but certainly ours.
And from a creator standpoint, I think bravery. I think abandoning the fear of failure. I think for a person like me, I've been at Barstool 7 or 8 years. I think it's very easy to fall into the ideas that you've had for all these years and this kind of it becomes formulaic, and you don't want to do something new because you're like, oh, I don't know if that'll work. Why don't I just stick to the things that have been working rather than thinking outside the box? Like, well, let's do a travel show. Let's do a cooking show. Instead of regular rap battles, let's do compliment rap battles or something like that. Let's try things that are new. Maybe we're afraid of failing on TikTok. Maybe like, I don't know if TikTok's going to work for me, so I just don't do it, rather than dipping the toe and saying, why not try? Like, no one cares if you fail. It doesn't matter if you fail. No one will even recognize if you fail, but if you succeed, that will be the way to break through to new audiences and to continue to grow the brand for hopefully another 20 years. We'll get you a mic. Say that again. I'm sorry.
Sorry. I just was wondering how you see real money gaming or sports betting fitting into the future of the Barstool Sports ecosystem and podcast and all that going forward.
Yeah, I think it'll, I would still argue it's a huge part of what we do today. Like, our crew bets obsessively on games. We always have bet obsessively on games. Not particularly a great group of gamblers, but that's really neither here nor there.
Really bad.
Very bad. But I think you will see us, I think you'll see into next year that, we start to establish ourselves back in that space. But I think it's, look, if you go back to the beginning of Barstool, Dave started a paper because, that's what he needed to get an ad business, and the ad business was sports betting. So it's very integral, arterial to who Dave is, who Dan is, a lot of our personalities. So I see that continuing. Really.
And it's authentic too. I think that people can smell the bullshit, and I think that there's a lot of brands who are saying like, oh, there's this massive industry around sports gambling right now, so we're just going to put a guy with a good haircut and have him scream at the camera like he's Jim Cramer, and we're going to try and jam sports betting down people's throats, and that reads very inauthentic. But the way that people at Barstool are sitting, watching games, sweating over these bets, I think that is the way that real Americans are gambling and experiencing that landscape. So I think staying true to it, I think there's definitely more gambling in Barstool's future.
All right, I think they're done with us.
All right, I'll go last.
At the risk of not, trying to have contrived moments, I've been sitting here trying to figure out what I would say, and I can't. So you're really good at it. Could you rhyme something with Sportico? And if we can go counterintuitive and go complimentary, that'd be great.
I think, Sportico has that sort of glow that makes you want to sit out on a portico, and I could keep going.
I couldn't.
No, it's a tough one though. It is. But I want to hit all the syllables though. I'm not leaving any meat on the bone. I want to get them all.
How much do your listeners care about business? I'm just curious. Like, do they blame the owner? I know they blame the quarterback. They blame the wide receiver. How much do they care about the business of sport?
I think that they care a lot because it affects everything. And I think you look at some franchises and the business is so bad that it affects everything. We had guys who are fans of the Washington Commanders, and the owner's business was so bad that it essentially ruined what their rooting experience was like. It made them hate the franchise that they loved, and everything went back to their owner. So it's almost like until you have the most important thing figured out, then you're not even going to be able to enjoy the sport that you love. And I think that it's something that's integral to every fan's experience. I think that if you're a basketball fan, you know that Mark Cuban just sold the Mavericks for $3.5 billion. I think that plays into the entire landscape of the sport. So I really think that people care because that will free their mind to be able to enjoy the sport that they love.
All right, well, truth be told, both of you, I thought we were going to miss Pat this morning. We do miss Pat this morning, but we didn't miss Pat this morning, if that makes sense. So thank you very much, both of you. Really appreciate it.
Really appreciate you. Thank you so much.